could represent a shear line going from side wall to side wall. And we'd have one group, usually a group of 4 dancers, on one side of the shear line, another group on the other side of the shear line, and we take one of the groups and we move them one direction or another. The other option from a sidewall to sidewall shear line is a head wall to head wall. I have to ask you just to imagine that, because they didn't construct the floor the way I asked them to for our square dance program. Okay, the next thing you need to know is how far did we move that group? And we typically express that in 2 possible terms. We talk about the amount of overlap that exists between the 2 sub-formations. So for example, if you could just for a moment envision offset waves. We typically have one wave down the center of the square somewhere, and outboard we have 2 mini waves. Well, each foursome is a box of 4, and the overlapped dancers are 2 dancers from each box that make up the wave. So we have a 50% overlap. It's all, question?
Do you want to have a square in front of you so you can offset them into a
I'll show you, we'll do that in a minute, but I have some other stuff that we're going to do. We can also measure the offset, so how many of the foursome are hanging out in space. And in this case, it evaluates to the same 50%. I have 2 of the 4 that are hanging out in space. Most commonly, our offsets have a magnitude of 50%. So most of the systems, and the system that I'm going to show you, doesn't pay any attention to that. We just assume 50%. And 99 and 44/100ths% of the time when you're dancing, if you encounter offsets, they'll be 50%. Then the last thing we need to keep track of is which direction did we shear. So if I have one group here and one group here, this group could have gone that way and I could have gone this way, or this group could have gone this way and I could have gone this way. So the system that I'm going to show you is going to take into account a fixed point, and we call it the hot corner of the room. And we're going to evaluate who moved towards the hot corner. And we're going to be constrained in our movements to move along the square axis, either side shear or head shear. So there's something called vector mathematics that if you tell me go to the hot corner, I might go like this on this 45-degree angle and walk straight to it. But you know, I could also get to it by walking along one of the shear lines for a while, and then walking along the other shear line for a while. And whichever shear line I walk, if I walk the head shear line, if I walk like this, I would say I'm getting closer to the hot corner. If I back up, I say I'm getting further away. And here, even though I'm walking a completely different direction, I would still say I'm getting closer to the hot corner. So this is going to be relative to the hot corner. We're going to keep track of who moved closer to the hot corner. Now I want my demo square.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we might as well put the side couples straddling this sidewall shear. Okay, yeah, so the boy on one side and the girl on the other. And so I'm going to start out and say, one of the things that was drilled into my head early in my square dance career, and so something I don't have to think about very much anymore, is couple numbers. If you tell me where's couple number 2, I don't really have to think about it. I know that they're there. And couple number 4 and couple number 3, behind me is couple number 1. I've already internalized that. I like to use things I've already internalized and I don't have to think about. Let me have please the head couples past the ocean and extend. Okay? Within your square, for most formations, there are 4 foursomes. I have this foursome, these 2 mini waves, is one of the foursomes. I have another foursome, this ocean wave of 4. That's 2. I have a third foursome, this far box of 4. That's 3. And I have another foursome, this ocean wave of 4. There are 4 foursomes independent of the orientation of the square. Would you guys do an all 8 counter rotate for me, please? Okay, so we've changed the orientation of the square. Instead of the waves going head wall to head wall, they go side wall to side wall. I still have 4 foursomes. There's this near ocean wave, this box of 4, the far ocean wave, and this box of 4, okay? Coincidentally, I have 4 positions in the square. So if I want the number 1 foursome, I go to the number 1 position in the square and I say, which foursome is closest? Oh, there's an ocean wave there. If I want the number 2 foursome, I can walk over to the number 2 position in the square and say which foursome is closer. It's this box of 4. Number 3 would be the far wave. Number 4 would be the other box, okay? Also, please. This is independent of lines, waves, or columns. I still have the 4 groups. Number 1 is a box of 4. Number 2 is a single file column. Number 3 is a box of 4. Number 4 is a single file column. Would you do an all 8 counter rotate? If I change the axis, same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I don't have to point them out individually. So now, to make the various offsets, and I'm going to set this aside for a minute, just because I want both hands free to manhandle my demo square. Okay? So remember, my hot corner is over here. So all I have to do is pick a foursome and move them toward the hot corner. So let me have both of you, if you would, drag your foursome this way, and we'll line up down the center. So this is a parallelogram column. Okay, and you notice it's the number 4 group of 4 that move closer to the hot corner. Remember, if I move this way, I'm moving closer to the hot corner. If I'm moving this way, I'm moving closer to the hot corner, but that's not what we did, okay? Set your square back, and in the number 1 foursome, press backwards. So there's the hot corner. You see they move closer to it. This is a number 1, okay? Press back forward, split recycle, and let's again take the number 1 foursome and move them towards the hot corner. So this is also a number 1. It's not necessarily dependent on the formation name. So we moved back, we had a triple box situation a moment ago, now we have offset waves. We still describe it as a number 1. What if it were just reversed? If the direction of the shear changed? Well, let's take this group and move them back here, and this group and move them up here. Stop in triple waves for me if you would. And this is the number 3 group, and they moved towards the hot corner. Now, one big advantage of this group, of this method, I know of people that can simply look at this and remember it. They make an image in their mind, like a photograph, and they can just remember it. If I were to say, in your offset waves, spin, chain, and exchange the gears, interrupt after the first swing with the mix, turn the stars a half, and exchange twice, personally, I would have to concentrate on the call as I was dancing that, and I would forget the shot. But if I evaluate first, and I say, this is a 3, I can kinesthetically, I can make a 3, and I can put it away and I can forget it.
It's okay that I forget it. I can concentrate on the call, and when it's all done, I can say, oh crap, I have no recollection of what it was. But guess what? All I gotta do is pull it back out and say, oh, it's a 3. I can recreate it, okay? So now, the methodology towards dancing these shape changers. I suggest that you take the first fraction of the call and you land normally. So I'm gonna ask these guys in their offset waves to do a relay the top. The first part of relay the top, actually before we tackle the call, we're gonna do the analysis and say, what is this? 3, okay? The first part of the call is a swing by the right, and I want them to fudge on the swing by the right so they come out to parallel waves. Go ahead, swing by the right, come to parallel waves. Now, piece of cake to finish the rest of relay the top. Go ahead, center cast 3/4, ends move up, find my star, go a quarter, somebody hook on the finish, and land normally. Now, how do you put it back? Well, first of all, what am I putting back? Putting back a number 3. Did I remember it? Not necessarily, but I have it to reference. So I go to my number 3 group. I say hot corner over there. I gotta move them closer. Back them up this way. Good, okay? Now that was somewhat straightforward, but what if I were to ask in your offset waves to do an all 8 counter rotate? Well, first of all, in the offset waves, I can have the centermost dancers kind of reach forward to see what the real waves are. And I know on an all 8 counter rotate that the center box of 4 stays intact. So center box of 4, box counter rotate, come to a normal box. The ends counter rotate around the outside, come to a normal setup. Now how do I put it back? Number 3 group, it's a wave instead of a box this time, but number 3 group, I move them over. And there's how I finish, okay? Easy system, takes a little practice to get fast on it, but it's very reliable. Let me show you another system, square your set.
So when we counter rotate offset wave with parallelogram, the axis change does not matter. We still put it at the same offset.
Correct.
But if from a parallelogram called normal counter rotate, that would change.
That would be a completely different thing.
Okay,
Yes,
cool.
okay? So, a question, Mark.
So there's 2 shears, right? So anytime to get back to the corner, it could be either one of those shears.
So Mark's question is, there are 2 shear axes, and it's kind of, how do we know which shear axis to use, and why do we put it back this particular way? Well, we start out with a formation that is already sheared. So we look at what shear axis was utilized. And when we're finished dancing the call, even if the axis of the square has changed as a result of the call, when we restore the distortion always happens along the original shear axis. So that's what happened on the all 8 counter rotate. The counter rotate changes the axis of the square, but we put our distortion back on the same axis. And if I remember, we started out in offset waves, and when we did an offset waves counter rotate, we ended up in parallelogram waves. The shape was very different, and that's why we call these shape changers. Okay, here's another system, okay? I have these head couples. They have a bow and a bell. This system is called head, side, bow, bell, pull, push, okay? Heads past the ocean again. Extend, move your waves a little closer to each other, okay? If I take this wave, which is the number 4 group, and move it just a little bit towards the back of the hall. Yeah, a little more. I want a 50% offset. Good. Remember we said we always kind of in these systems assume 50%. That's the most common. Okay? If the shear is along the head wall. We choose head couples for this evaluation. At the head spot, there is a bow and there is a bell. And we talk about push-pull. The bow pushed, the bell pulled. It doesn't matter which you use, as long as you pick one and you evaluate it correctly. In my experience, people that use this system, if they dance the bow's part, they tend to say bow. If they dance the bell's part, they tend to use the bell stuff. Would you take, so this is a bow push, but it's equally accurately expressed as a head bell pull. You can use either one, they evaluate to the same thing. Would you guys change the offset? Just take the ones, okay? So where that was a head bow push, now this is a head bell pull. Okay? And this is a head bow pull, and this is a head bell push. Okay? You can use either one of those. If you use this system, you can change back and forth. Dance, 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 yada. Oh, this is a head bow pull. Dance, 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 land. Oh, this is a head bell push. You can make a completely independent analysis each time, or you can stick with always the bow, always the bell. A question for you.
What would you call it in the other system? Would it be a 3 or?
Okay, so in this system, this would be a 4. Come over here to my 4 group of 4, and they've moved towards the hot corner. So this is a 4. Okay? Put Rick.
Head bell push, which fingers do you hold?
That's okay. So that's the problem. That's the I'm not going to say that's a disadvantage to this. That's an advantage the other system has that this doesn't. Many people use this system and they use it very successfully. If that appeals to you, go for it. It doesn't matter what system you use, as long as the system works accurately and works well for you. I personally use the numbering system. I also leverage the numbering system for staggered setups and for diagonal setups. So put your, let's see, I just want one more thing and I'll come back to leveraging that. Line your ocean waves back up and bring the number 1 foursome towards me, offset 50%. Okay? So in the number system, what is this? Number 3 group is walked towards the hot corner. Okay? If we're talking head, side, bow, bell, pull, push, the shear line goes side wall to side wall. I got to use a side couple to identify it. Side bow has pushed, side bell has pulled. You can use either. You don't have to remember both of those. If I just remember side bow push, I'm good. Okay? Let's see. Line your waves up. And forward inch or sit down. Well, I've had this way before, sit down. Okay? And you guys center up and line up single file for me. Yeah, single file facing me. Okay? So, diagonals in the square, there are actually only 2 possibilities. There's the possibility that we go diagonal this direction, and there's a possibility that we go diagonal this direction. Here's the hot corner. In this single file, where would you guess the number 1 end is, and where would you guess the number 3 end is? Here's number 1, and here's number 3. Let me push the diagonal this direction. Okay, so you had to pull you this way. Okay, so here's my diagonal. Here's the number 1 end, walked towards the hot corner. Now, if I'm using this for a stagger situation, Blocks are easy because blocks have 4 people in your block. You do the whole thing with 4 people, it never changes. But staggers go every which way but loose, and the shape changes in staggers. And you really need to remember where the diagonal is. So I can look at this diagonal, park it away, and it's there when I need it. Change your diagonal. Okay, so there's the number 3 end of the diagonal, walked towards the hot corner. So I can mark it like this. Could I get my other 4 back up for a moment? I just want to show you one additional thing. And stand in blocks if you would. Keep your diagonal where it is, and the others will fill in around you. Perfect. Okay. So I think we're good.
No.
Oh, wait a minute. No, we need somebody. There we go.
No.
So we got 8. Yeah. There we go. I'll take that. Okay, perfect. Okay. So I want to just point out to you quickly that virtually anywhere you're standing in this square, we can talk about the quadrants in the square. The 2 shear lines bisect the square. There's one that divides like this, and there's another one that divides like this. And in my 4 quadrants, I have 2 dancers here in a quadrant. I have 2 dancers here in another quadrant, 2 more in another quadrant, and 2 more here. And when you're evaluating these diagonals, if you happen to be in the diagonal, it's pretty easy to see. If you're not in the diagonal and you're looking for where it is, it can be a bit confusing as to where it is. But if you look in your quadrant, we have a miniature diagonal that happens to be parallel with the real diagonal. If you know the direction your miniature diagonal goes, you know the direction that the whole square's diagonal goes. So that can be helpful. Also, later on, for those of you that are going to stay and dance the 3A program, we're going to talk a lot about quadrant usage when we're in large matrices. So when we're in split phantom columns, split phantom waves, things like that. You don't have to know that now, but in a week you'll want to know it. Okay? Let's, you guys take a, let's get all the squares up. Okay? Let's,